I was halfway through folding laundry when the phone lit up with Dad. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered, expecting the usual dry voice and some complaint about the weather or Landon's latest achievement. Instead, he skipped the small talk and went right for the jugular. "I know the loan's cleared," he said. "We're gifting the house to your brother Landon for his graduation." I didn't say anything, just stood there staring at the cracked ceiling above the couch, phone pressed tight to my ear, like maybe I misheard him. Gifting the house? I thought maybe he meant an old watch, a recliner, something small and dumb. But no, he meant the house. The house I saved. Before I could choke out a response, he kept going. "You're not invited to the party. Don't bring your attitude into his day." I pulled the phone away for a second, looked at it like it had betrayed me, then put it back. My mouth was dry. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than his voice now. That was it. 4 years and 8 months of extra payments, almost every dollar I didn't need to survive, gone into that mortgage, and they were handing it to Landon like a gift bag. "Are you serious?" I asked. He huffed, like I was the one being ridiculous. "Stop making everything about money. You should be happy for your brother. This is a family celebration." Then he hung up. Quick note: before we start, share in the comments, how's your day going and where are you joining from? And let's continue. I just stood there, holding the silent phone, like maybe if I didn't move, it would rewind itself. After a few seconds of blank space, I called the only person outside of my parents who knew what I'd done, who'd helped me do it. My uncle, Ray Cole. He picked up on the first ring. "They make the call?" "Yeah," I said. "You want to tell them, or should I?" He didn't give a pep talk, just paused, then said, "You remember the trust? It's your name in there. I've got a plan." The kitchen smelled like old coffee, burned toast, and something sour stuck behind the fridge. I stood there with that stack of bank letters in my hand and didn't say a word. I already knew what was inside. You don't leave envelopes like that unopened unless you're scared of what they'll say. That house had history. It wasn't pretty or fancy, but it had bones. The siding was cracked, the paint never quite matched where Dad tried to touch it up, and the back screen door slammed loud enough to wake the neighbors. But it was ours, or it had been, until the money stopped lining up. I grew up in that 3-bedroom, back when the lawn looked like it got attention and the front steps didn't creak. Every neighbor on the block knew us. Most waved. Some kept their distance when they heard yelling, but nobody ever stepped in. That was the rule on our street. Mind your own business, nod if someone dies. Dad ran Mercer Property Services. Snow in the winter, grass in the summer, basic repairs all year. His plows were secondhand, the mowers were loud, and the trailer behind the truck barely stayed legal. Every couple months, we had to rewire the lights on it or risk a ticket. He called it real work, said anyone who sat at a desk had soft hands and no spine. But the house was 2 zones, one for Landon and one for the rest of us. From the start, everything bent toward him. He got the better birthday cakes, the first shot at any leftover gift cards, the rides to soccer or band or whatever he was into that week. It wasn't like he asked for it all, he just got it, like gravity worked differently around him. By the time he hit 33, Landon was still finishing school, 2-year college, then 3 majors, then a year off, then back again. He worked part-time, floated through retail jobs, blamed fit and timing, and somehow stayed golden in their eyes. I didn't get that luxury. I got a paper route, then weekend shifts at the hardware store. If I wanted anything, I paid for it. Senior trip, I skipped it. Yearbook, no point. Nobody would look at my page anyway. Mom kept the lights on. Lydia Mercer could stretch a $5 bill into a meal for 3. She paid the water bill, juggled late notices, made boxed mac and cheese feel like dinner. When Dad blew up over something, she smoothed it over like nothing happened. Her go-to phrase for me was always, "You'll figure it out." That was her way of showing belief, I guess. After high school, I worked construction, then delivery, then landed as a sales rep for a flooring supplier. It wasn't glamorous, but I got commission, benefits, a car I paid off in 2 years. I ate at home, patched my own clothes, and learned early that asking for help was just a long walk to a dead end. Meanwhile, Dad's business started slipping. One busted transmission on his main plow took out a whole month. A warm winter hit next, and clients pushed everything back. No snow meant no work. No work meant the mortgage started falling behind. I didn't know how bad until that day in the kitchen. I was looking for a fork and grabbed the wrong drawer. Found the stack instead, envelopes thick and grim with that same red logo on every one. Some already had creases where he'd opened them and stuffed them back in. Most were untouched. Heavy paper, heavier silence. I pushed the drawer shut, slower than I should have, and sat down at the table. That house was 4 or 5 missed weeks away from being gone. They weren't going to save it. They couldn't. I already knew who would. I left the kitchen, walked straight to my old room, and closed the door like I used to when Dad started yelling. The mattress was still firm on one side and caved in on the other, like time had frozen all the parts that didn't matter. I grabbed a legal pad from the desk drawer and started writing numbers. My paychecks were steady. Not huge, but enough. If I cut eating out, skipped the new tires I needed before winter, and pushed off replacing that sagging couch, I could throw most of my commission toward the loan. I circled totals, scratched notes in the margins, added it all up 3 different ways. None of it looked easy. Every version meant less life, more grind. But I knew what I was doing, and I chose it anyway. The payments started slow and quiet. I set up auto transfers. I made a calendar alarm. Every 2 weeks, it went out like clockwork. Nobody asked, nobody noticed. I didn't tell anyone but Uncle Ray. Dad still gave his speeches. He'd stand in the garage or in front of the TV, talking about grit and holding the line, like the line just stayed where it was out of respect for him. Meanwhile, it was my money doing the holding. Mom saw it in pieces. I'd come over and there'd be a pan of lasagna cooling on the stove, or a leftover casserole wrapped and handed off, just in case. Once, after a big chunk cleared, she texted me late. "Love you, thank you." That was it. No follow-up. No conversation about the mortgage or what it meant. She never asked Dad to say anything, and he didn't. When things got worse, when snow barely covered the lawn and clients disappeared, Ray stepped in like the only adult in the room. He wasn't flashy about it. He just sat them down one Sunday and told them straight, "This house is 1 court notice from being gone, and no one's going to bail you out." He'd seen one of our cousins lose her place over the same kind of mess. Paperwork, unpaid debt, and pride too big to admit it was falling apart. That's when he helped set up the trust. It kept the place protected but locked down. The house couldn't be sold, gifted, or handed off without hitting specific terms tied to the person making the payments. That person was me. My name sat there, small, tucked between clauses, but real. It meant something. I was already carrying the weight. Now it was legally mine to carry. And if things ever went sideways, it was the only thing standing between that house and a bank auction sign. I didn't think about it like ownership. Not back then. I told myself it was enough that the mailbox stopped being a grenade. I told myself it was enough that Mom could sleep without waking up over bounced checks. So, I kept going. Every payment chipped away at the number, one statement at a time. Watching the balance drop was like dragging a boulder across wet concrete. Slow, ugly, and brutal. But it moved. Even through the worst lake-effect snowstorms, when my heater rattled all night and the plow guy missed my street, I'd still make those transfers before coffee. Through late sunsets when I could have been out with friends or just not thinking about it, I kept the habit going. And every time I hit confirm, I sent my money to an address that treated me like I didn't exist. Ray opened the door in socks, took one look at the folder under my arm, and pointed toward the kitchen. "Coffee's hot," he said. "You're going to want 2 cups. He sat across from me at the table, the binder between us like a loaded weapon. His house smelled like pencil shavings and burnt toast, same as it always did. He didn't waste time. "You want to know if the trust says what you think it says?" he asked. I nodded, flipping it open to the flagged page. "It's clear, right? They can't just hand the house off." He leaned in and tapped the paragraph near the bottom. "Control sits with the contributing party. That's you. No decisions without your consent. No transfers without your signature." I stared at that line until it blurred. I wasn't confused. I just hadn't wanted to believe they'd do it anyway. "I made the final payment this week," I said, "and they're acting like it's Landon's house." Ray didn't blink. "Then it's time to remind them who kept it out of foreclosure." That Thursday night, the house was already full. Pre-graduation party, cousins flying in early, the yard lined with cars like a wedding. Landon spelled out in white block letters across the porch, lights on every bush, folding tables covered in plastic cloth, and grocery store deli trays. I walked up with a 6-pack just to stay quiet, just to see it for myself. I wasn't even trying to make a scene yet. Inside, I got handed a plate of wings and pointed toward the backyard. I set the food down untouched and stood by the living room doorway where I could hear my father holding court. He was telling a story about perseverance, about getting through lean years and never letting the bank win. People nodded like he'd done the impossible. Mom was pouring sweet tea into red cups and not looking at me. Landon stood in the center like a prom king, talking about plans for the basement, acting like the whole house was already his Airbnb. I waited for a beat, then I walked up to my father. "Quick question," I said, low and level. "When exactly did you decide the house was Landon's?" He barely turned his head. "This isn't the time for one of your moods. People are here to celebrate." "So you just skipped over the guy who paid for it?" I asked. "That was easy for you?" He stepped aside like he was moving past an argument, not standing in one. "You don't show up for family things, Evan. You keep your distance." "I didn't want the drama." I laughed once, short and sharp. "You mean the drama of explaining that I paid off $600,000 while you took credit?" The room got quiet, not a crash or a gasp, just that uncomfortable shuffle where nobody wants to be near the next line. He walked off without answering. Landon tried to intercept me near the kitchen. "Come on, man, don't do this now." I didn't respond. I just left the plate on the table and walked out the front door, heart beating fast but steady. I'd seen everything I needed. Back home, I laid the binder open flat, reread every clause, and marked each one with a sticky tab. The next morning, I texted Ray again. "It's go time." I pulled up a few houses down and parked behind a minivan with balloons taped to the mirrors. The curb looked like a block party. Porch lit up, folding chairs out front, music spilling from a Bluetooth speaker. The banner over the steps read, "Congrats Landon," in big black letters. I walked in through the side gate and slid along the wall inside, unnoticed at first. Everyone was deep in their second plate of food and third round of compliments. People passed around stories about Landon's new job leads, how he was setting up the basement for a creative workspace. They spoke like it was already his home, like the closing papers had been signed in the sky. Dad stood at the fireplace like it was a pulpit, glass in hand, voice low but firm. I knew the tone. He was mid-monologue, delivering his usual speech about grit and keeping what's yours. He told them the house had almost been lost once, but he refused to let it go. Said some months were rough, but we pulled through. I leaned against the hallway arch, arms crossed. Uncle Ray stood a few feet away, one hand in his pocket, watching the scene like a man waiting for a traffic light to turn. Mom moved through the crowd with a smile glued to her face, topping off drinks and passing out napkins. Every time our eyes met, she looked away before I could hold the stare. Nobody said a word about the transfers. Nobody mentioned how the debt got cleared. I guess in Dad's version, money just came from sheer will and a few motivational phrases. Then he tapped his glass with a spoon, called everyone in tighter. "Before we wrap this up," he said, "we want to share something special." He reached for Mom's hand, lifted his drink, and smiled. "As a family, we've decided the best way to celebrate Landon's hard work is by gifting him the house. It's his now, his space to build his future." The room let out that awkward, polite noise people make when they think they're supposed to clap. A few chuckles, some nods, hands hesitantly meeting. Ray stepped forward before the lie had time to settle. His voice was low, steady, like a guy reading off school closings on the radio. "Just a quick correction," he said. "The house isn't something you can gift, not like that. It's held in trust, with active clauses tied to the party who made the financial contributions. That means the final say doesn't sit with you." Nobody said my name. They didn't need to. Heads turned. I watched my father's smile flicker. He let out a tight laugh and waved it off. "It's just legal fine print. This is a family matter." Ray didn't move. "It's not fine print. It's binding. And it's not just family when it involves trust protections and 6 figures of cleared debt." You could feel it shift. Not explosive, just uncomfortable. Like everyone realized they'd been clapping for a show that wasn't real. I stepped back toward the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water off the counter, and walked out the back door while people stared at their shoes. 2 mornings after the party, I loaded the hedge trimmers into the back seat and drove over. They'd been in my shed for years, originally borrowed after a "can you hold on to these till I fix the garage" moment that never circled back. The porch looked the same, cheap welcome mat, faded wreath from last fall still on the door. I pulled my key out of habit, stuck it in the lock, and it stopped halfway. Deadbolt was new. I tried again, slower, checking the angle. Nothing, no wiggle, no mistake. Then the door cracked open. Landon stood there with one hand braced against the frame, boxes behind him, labeled, stacked, half unpacked. He glanced at the key still sticking out of the lock, then looked me dead in the face. "Dad said it's simpler this way," he mumbled. I waited for more, but that was it. He didn't make a scene. He didn't explain. He just closed the door gently but firm, sealing it with a quiet click. I stood there for a second, hand still on the key that didn't work anymore. Then I turned, walked back down the steps I'd shoveled 100 times, and got in the car. I didn't feel shocked, just stripped. Back at my apartment, I dumped the file box onto the kitchen table. It was heavier than I remembered. Papers spilled, loan payoff statements, scanned emails from the bank, legal documents, and every stamped envelope I'd kept just in case. I lined them up, sorted by date, dug out the original trust agreement, unfolded and dog-eared, marked with notes from Uncle Ray in blue pen. I read every line like it was a contract for a client. No emotion, no assumptions, just facts. The more I read, the clearer it got. My name wasn't buried in footnotes. It sat center stage, tied directly to obligations and rights, not as a favor, as a legal protection. I grabbed a pad and made 2 lists. Left side, things I couldn't control, Dad's pride, Landon's entitlement, Mom's refusal to take sides. Right side, things I could, my money, my signature, my say. The second list was longer than I expected. That same night, I searched for trust attorneys in the county and found Brendan Pike, mid-30s, good reviews, straightforward website with actual statutes quoted. No slogans, just law. He met me the next day in an office above a real estate title company, clean desk, no receptionist. I handed him the folder, and he started reading before I even finished sitting down. He didn't blink when I said, "They changed the locks," called it simpler. He just uncapped a pen and circled the section that made that illegal without my consent. "Your name's in the enforcement clause. You're not a donor, you're the payor and principal beneficiary. On paper, this isn't a family squabble. It's a trust breach." I exhaled harder than I meant to. My shoulders dropped like someone had finally unhooked a weight I didn't realize I was still carrying. Brendan pushed the folder back toward me. "If you want to enforce, you're on solid ground. We'll do it clean." Brendan filed everything fast. County, state, trust court. The offices where people actually read what hits their desk. He sent copies to the recorder's office and flagged the trust as under active dispute. It didn't take much, just a name, a clause, and a filing fee. I called Haley Cole that night. She was Ray's daughter, worked estate filings down in Syracuse, smart, methodical, and the kind of person who reads fine print for fun. I didn't even finish explaining before she said, "Send me the trust document and the timeline. I'll look into it." She called the next day with her voice low, serious. "Your dad tried to initiate a transfer 2 weeks ago," she said. "Ran into flag errors because your name's tagged on the asset title. System bounced it to pending and flagged it for review." "So he knew," I said. "He knew he couldn't do it legally." She didn't hesitate. "It wasn't a mistake. He figured you wouldn't challenge it." That part hit. It wasn't confusion. It was a bet. He thought I'd stay quiet, be the good son, let it slide, like always. I didn't tell her how many times I almost had. Later that day, I walked across the street to knock on Mrs. Donna Keene's door. She was over 70, sharp as ever, and remembered everything from who skipped garbage day to when the roofers last came through. Her house still smelled like powdered lemon cleaner and those vanilla wafers she bought in bulk. She opened the door and raised an eyebrow. "You finally ready to clean out that garage, Evan?" "Not quite," I said. "I might need a witness." She stepped aside without another word and let me in. I explained the situation, laid it out straight. No spin, just facts. What had been filed, what might follow. She didn't flinch. "You want me watching the porch?" "I need eyes on anything unusual. What comes in, what gets posted, who touches what. Anything at all." She nodded once and pulled a small spiral notebook from her counter drawer. Same one I used when they tried to slip that cable trench without telling the city. I left, knowing she'd log every movement with a time and date before the wind even settled. That weekend was the summer cookout near Lake Ontario. Same picnic shelter we'd used for years, plastic tablecloths, grocery bags tied to the grills, half-melted popsicles in coolers. I showed up with burgers and a thin black folder under my arm. Everyone acted normal, burgers sizzling, kids yelling about soccer, adults doing the usual talk about gas prices and bad backs. But near the main table, talk circled again. "Landon's house," someone said, like the place had picked him in a raffle. I pulled out a single page. It was the cover sheet from the trust binder, my name listed under enforcement rights and final authority. I laid it face up in the center of the table. Nobody said a word at first. Then a couple of my uncles leaned in to read. A cousin nudged her husband. Mom looked at the paper, then at Dad, like she was waiting for him to say something smart. He didn't. Mom cleared her throat and asked if anyone had tried the pasta salad yet. Nobody answered. The air felt sideways after that. People didn't leave right away, but they stopped making eye contact. A few uncles asked quiet questions. One aunt left early without hugging anyone. That night, Landon posted a video on Instagram, 30 seconds of him on the porch with the caption, "Day 1." He was smiling, talking about setting up the studio downstairs. Heart emojis filled the comments. Someone asked when the housewarming was. I didn't reply. I didn't even open the messages. I just closed the app and sat at my table with one hand resting on that folder like it was a seatbelt in a car I'd just buckled before the impact. By Saturday morning, the sky was pale and flat. One of those overcast upstate days that looks colder than it is. Haley's text came through at 7:13 in the morning. "Everything's live. All systems show dispute open." For once, it wasn't just in my head. My version had weight. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the silence soak in. Then I got up, got dressed, and waited. Mid-morning, just before the catering truck pulled up for the graduation party, a process server and a county deputy walked up my parents' front steps. Mrs. Keene was already at her front window, lace curtain lifted just enough for one eye. Mom opened the door still holding a pack of party napkins in her hand. I imagined her smile starting out polite and then flattening when she saw the manila envelopes. She didn't invite them in, didn't need to. The server handed over the formal notices. Dispute filed, trust protections triggered, enforcement pending. No one was yelling. Nobody cared how anyone felt. This wasn't emotional, it was procedural, and they weren't there for opinions. They were there for missing signatures and conditions that had never been met. Mrs. Keene told me later that Dad stood in the hallway, just behind Mom, arms folded until they read the words out loud. She said she watched his shoulders drop, slow and steady, like a tire finally giving out. A little before noon, the tone changed again. A white flatbed rolled up the street, turned into the driveway, and idled. Landon's car, an old silver coupe he'd stopped making payments on months back, was parked half crooked behind the shed. There'd always been someone to quietly cover him before. Not anymore. The repo guy didn't even knock. He checked the VIN, took a few photos, then looped the straps around the tires like it was just another job. And it was. The lender's clock had been ticking all on its own, totally separate from ours. Landon just ran out of luck and leverage on the same day. Guests on the lawn stopped mid-conversation. One guy had a paper plate in his hand and forgot to put it down. Someone asked if it was a mistake. Nobody answered. The ratchet clicked tight and the flatbed tilted back. The sound of the truck reversing off the drive was louder than it needed to be, like it wanted to be noticed. Nobody yelled, nobody tried to stop it. It was too late for any of that. By 2 p.m., I got the text from Brendan. "Bring your copy. Locksmith's on standby. We'll meet at the front steps." I drove over and parked 3 houses down. I didn't want to come in with fanfare, just fact. Uncle Ray pulled in behind me, calm as always. Folder tucked under his arm like it weighed nothing. I nodded at him once and he nodded back. We didn't need to talk. I opened the car door, stepped out, and walked across the same concrete I'd cleared 100 mornings. This time, I didn't feel like the one carrying the secret. I felt like the one finally calling it what it was. I reached the porch, both feet planted, no more waiting. Mom opened the door like she'd been waiting behind it the whole time. Dad stood just over her shoulder, arms folded. Landon was back in the hallway, phone in hand, like he was about to stream the whole thing or text someone who might stop it. Brendan stepped forward first and introduced himself, tone dry and neutral. His voice didn't rise or drop. He laid out the facts like he was reading a grocery list, terms of the trust, enforcement triggers. and that access would be restricted once the locksmith completed the hardware change. "We're not here for interpretation," he said, setting the notice on the hallway table. "We're here to execute the existing terms. The trust will be enforced. No transfers can occur without Mr. Mercer's consent. That hasn't happened. Personal belongings will be collected during the access window we already outlined in writing." Dad scoffed, then tried to pivot into one of his usual speeches. "So, this is how loyalty works now? You grow up under a roof, and the second you've got the upper hand, you shut us out. Over what? Paperwork?" Brendan didn't blink. He slid the schedule across the table with one finger. "This is not a debate. This is the timeline." Landon stepped forward finally, still gripping his phone like it had answers. "You're really doing this to your own family, after everything?" I looked at him and answered without blinking. "I already did more than most sons ever would. And I got locked out for it." He didn't say anything after that, just stepped back and stared at the floor. The locksmith moved past us without a word, tool bag slung low, like it was any other Tuesday. He started with the front, then moved to the back, out with the old hardware, in with brushed nickel replacements. Click, screw, click, drill. No drama, just work. Uncle Ray stood by the fireplace the whole time, didn't talk, didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched. That was his way. I didn't need him to speak. His presence was enough to hold the wall up. We walked the rooms, clipboard in hand, noted the condition of each one, took pictures of anything that looked new, anything that might go missing. Bedrooms, living room, garage, nothing fancy, just proof. We kept the talk short. Mom cried when we reached the hallway. Not loud, not sobbing. Just silent tears and a tissue from her apron pocket. She didn't ask me to stop. She just looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. I'm not made of stone. But I didn't stop. When we stepped back out onto the porch, the air was thick. Brendan handed me a small white envelope. New keys. 3 of them. I didn't hold them up or announce anything. I slid them into my pocket and nodded once. Not to anyone, just to the moment. The day after enforcement, I took a slow walk through every room. No clipboard this time. Just a screwdriver and a roll of blue painter's tape. I marked what needed fixing, what I wanted gone, what never meant anything to me, but somehow stayed behind like clutter from someone else's life. Brendan handled the last filings. He made sure the county records were clean, the trust language locked down, the keys registered in my name only, no disputes pending, no transfer attempts hanging in limbo. Done. Uncle Ray invited me over that weekend, no speeches. Just poured 2 coffees and said, finally, like he'd been waiting years to exhale. Mom and Dad moved into a 2-bedroom apartment off Culver. It had beige siding and shared parking. No lawn, no garage, no sunrise snow to shovel, or neighbors asking about the plow routes. I heard through a cousin that Dad still acted like it was temporary. Landon crashed with friends on the east side of town. Guys he'd known since school, all chipping in rent, figuring it out month to month. First time he'd ever had to split utilities and still come up short. I didn't check in, not once. I stayed busy. I hired a roofer to fix the flashing over the back deck, clean the gutters, replace the drafty window in the kitchen. Every task made the place feel less like a shrine to somebody else's name, and more like what it actually was, mine. When the texts started, cousins, aunts, people who suddenly wanted to catch up, I left them unread. One cousin called twice, then sent a voice memo asking if we could talk it out like family. I deleted it. I wasn't sitting through another guilt trip dressed up as a reconciliation. I told one person, and one person only, what it felt like. Mrs. Keene. I saw her across the street one evening, standing on her porch in her old pink slippers. She waved. I waved back. "You swapped out the porch bulb, didn't you?" she said. "Yeah," I told her. "Lower watt, less glare." She nodded. "Looks better this way." It did. I didn't walk around with a victory speech in my head. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't payback. It was just the first time I'd shut the valve instead of letting it leak. If there's a lesson, it's not about law or loyalty. It's about knowing the difference between love and obligation. One feeds you, the other bleeds you dry. I didn't burn the bridge. I just built a guardrail and started charging toll. And for once, the people who lived on my generosity learned what it felt like when the road finally ended. One last thing. When did you finally choose respect over keeping the peace? If you've got hype, tap it to boost this. Please subscribe and like and drop a comment.